My next guest is Leo Knight, a former Canadian police officer and host of PrimetimeCrime.com. He's also the law and order columnist for Sun Media's affiliate, 24 Hours. He's based in Vancouver, but joins me from Toronto. Leo, sorry I'm not out there today. I'm back here in Calgary, but I appreciate you joining us.
You're very welcome, Ezra.
Now, you've been following this case, as have so many Canadians. If we catch Luka Magnotta, if he is convicted of these horrific crimes, what sentence awaits him back here in Canada?
Well, I think clearly it's a first-degree murder allegation he'd be facing. The whole thing was clearly set up in advance. That's why it was videotaped and everything. And in Canada, the maximum sentence for first-degree murder is a life sentence in custody with no chance of parole before 25 years.
Now, how often are murderers, first-degree murderers, kept beyond that 25-year limit? Is it almost all of them that are paroled after 25 years?
No, quite the contrary, and it depends on the circumstances. Their eligibility for parole comes at 25 years. They have to apply for it. The parole board would review whether or not they should give them a hearing. Typically, they give them a hearing. They then notify anybody who is involved, any of the victims' family, that sort of thing, would get involved and be invited to attend the hearing. Quite often, family members do attend. Quite often, they vigorously oppose the parole. And it's touch and go as to whether or not the parole board will give it. As an example, there's a fellow named Stephen Lee Leclerc who about every 2 years comes up for parole, and he has been eligible for parole. I think the first time was in the 2004 range, and every 2 years since then he's been applying for parole, and he's still being held in custody.
Well, that's good to hear. Now, I'm sure that in celebrity cases, Paul Bernardo, in the case of late Clifford Olson, there would be no chance for political reasons that a parole board would grant early parole. But what about those cases when the media spotlight isn't there?
Well, that's an interesting point, Ezra, simply because it's in the higher profile cases where the media actually has an effect on whether or not parole is given. And I absolutely agree with the point you're making now, is that in those ones where the media spotlight is not shining on the parole board, quite often they'll make a decision to grant.
Now, let's talk about other crimes. I mean, the crime of rape, or now as it's called, sexual assault. What kind of sentences do rapists in Canada traditionally get sentenced to, and what kind of parole do they usually see? I mean, I haven't been in a criminal court in many years, and the first time I appeared there as a law student, I was shocked by how short the sentences were, and I understood that day parole was commonly availed to these criminals, 1/6 of the sentence. If someone was convicted of rape in Canada today, how quick would they be back on the streets?
Well, they could be back as quickly as 1/3 of their sentence. Most people who are sentenced to a custodial sentence in Canada will only serve 2/3 at max of whatever sentence is given. If they're sentenced to 6 years, the likelihood that they'd spend any more than 4 years in jail is remote. The likelihood, in fact, the average that they'd spend any more than 2 years in jail is also relatively rare.
Because the full parole kicks in at 1/3. How about day parole? Do we still give day parole to violent offenders?
Absolutely.
Including the rapists, eh?
Absolutely. The Correction Services Canada's mandate in their mind is not to contain and protect society, even though that's one of the mandates that judges must consider in sentencing. Their mandate, in their view, is to get people out on the streets and back into the community. It doesn't matter. I've covered cases where I just wrote 2 weeks ago about a fellow named Tracy Lloyd Kaza in Vancouver. After his 100th conviction, he's getting out again.
100th conviction. What was he convicted of? Are these violent offenses?
This is the fellow you remember, Ezra, back in 2008, who was stealing jewelry off of elderly patients in a Vancouver hospital. He's got convictions for everything from assault to robbery to theft.
So he has been violent.
Yes.
And he's back at 100 convictions, and he's being paroled again.
Yes.
And is that a provincial matter, or is this all federal now?
That particular parole is a provincial, but federal time, as you'll know, is anything that's 2 years and above is federal time. They come under Correction Services Canada. Anything 2 years less a day is provincial time.
Now, I'm relying on your expertise here. I have a question about something that was called conditional sentencing. That is, you don't have to, it sounds like a sentence, but actually the condition is you don't have to serve any time at all if you just behave well. It's like a sentence that doesn't kick in unless the person...
Essentially,
do we still give conditional sentences? Yeah, you're grounded. Do we still give those for violent criminals in Canada?
Yes, we do. Although the way the conditional sentencing was set up, it was set up so it would be for non-violent offenses. Yet what happens in courts in Canada today is that if you're charged with an offense, you could plead down to a lesser but included offense. For example, if you're charged initially with robbery and a home invasion, you could plead guilty to break and enter, which is a non-violent offense, and be given a conditional sentence.
Huh. Leo Knight, you bring to me news that I sort of knew, but I'm glad you clarified that this is still the case under this so-called conservative government with a so-called truth in sentencing mandate. I think we have to reform these laws, and maybe the case of Luka Magnotta, if he's convicted, will be a catalyst for that. Thanks for joining us today from Toronto.
You're very welcome, Ezra.